Hello.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of
the Super Data Brothers Super Data Show.
That's right. I am Ryan.
And I am Eric.
And we are real-life brothers.
In real life.
Who work in the data and analytics industry. So today we have got an awesome show teed up for you. We're going to be talking to Zach and Sabin from Zing Data all about mobile BI, why it matters, and we're going to get into some of the talk about real-world generative AI and business intelligence and what's actually happening today.
Yeah. You know, Ryan, I'm so excited for today's show because, I mean, you've seen it. I've seen it. Other tools trying to put mobile BI in. You know, I've seen it implemented where I've been. It's just either people don't adopt it, or it's too clunky, or it's like you're trying to shoehorn like a normal report or dashboard into a mobile form factor. Doesn't really work. So like I'm excited for the show because I'm interested to see and to talk about like how we could actually work on mobile and some of the other factors that are coming in these days, like some of the generative AI and that sort of stuff, which we'll also be talking about. So yeah, I think it's going to be should be an interesting discussion.
Absolutely, and that's, you're really right. Like my experience with mobile BI is that it almost the experiences that have been delivered by the major vendors almost universally suck. And so I'm really excited to talk to someone who's focused on making sure that, because it just, at the end of the day, it seems like you should be able to get a really good BI experience on one of these things, right?
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk to them about how they think about it, why it matters, why mobile BI is an important thing that you should be taking into account. And so why don't we go ahead and bring them on and get started. All right, Sabin and Zach, welcome.
Hey, welcome.
Hey, Ryan.
Thanks so much, guys. We're not brothers in real life.
No.
We're longtime friends.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we get we get asked that, so we added it to the intro because we get DMs all the time. Are you guys really brothers? It's
brothers?
Like,
we're not just using the term bro. Yeah, it's like we are brothers.
Yep. Yeah. So like we said in the intro, we're really excited to talk to you guys here today. Why don't you give us kind of if you could each give us just the 30-second, kind of who you are and what your background is, where you come from.
Sure. My name's Zach, co-founder of Zing. And my background was actually in building mobile. I actually built Facebook's first mobile ads and their first work in speech recognition. And so spent a lot of time thinking about ways you could make a step change easier. And then when I was running data and product teams, realized like very few people at a company actually knew SQL, were in Metabase or a Jupyter notebook. And if you could open that up, you actually could get way more people able to use stuff on a daily basis. And that was where Sabin and I connected. We've been friends for 10 years and said, hey, is this crazy? And then said, no, this isn't crazy. And we started building it initially nights and weekends. And then about a year ago, jumped in full time and raised around and all that kind of fun stuff. And now have a product out in the market used by a bunch of folks.
That's awesome.
Great. Yeah. So I'll chip in there as well. My first job out of college was actually writing these BI reports, SQL reports based on HR data, used for performance management and different sorts of things. So that's what I started with. Fast forward a couple of years, was working at Rakuten, focused on their e-commerce transaction data, set up a really cool, fancy pipeline. And no matter how cool it was, the consumption of it always ended up being problematic in terms of who got access to it, what was the best way for people to get to it, how could they easily ask questions. And this is a problem, 11 years ago. and still for where we are now, I think has not really been addressed. And so that's where Zach and I kind of got together and said, this problem that we've both seen it. I think there's a larger audience that is still dealing with it. And so we got together to work on this.
That's awesome. So that's kind of a good place, I think, to start. Is I'm very curious on your take of like who, when we think about mobile BI and analytics, who do you think is the ideal audience for that? I mean, are we designing are we trying to design an on-the-go experience for people who already consume our data products and BI, or are we trying to reach people? Is it better to try to reach people who currently are disconnected from the data completely and bring them into kind of the data and analytics world? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the second group that you mentioned is the really fascinating one. So as context, I built this product with Sabin thinking that it would be used by, heads of product, heads of data, SaaS companies, right? Kind of that first bucket when they were on the go, that kind of use case. And we certainly have some of those users. But the thing that we were super surprised by and we're not expecting is folks from a major, you've heard of them, pizza company in the US, or a major agricultural company, or a major energy company signing up. And we weren't expecting those types of use cases. But it turns out when we go and ask, hey, why'd you sign up? We're an early startup. How'd you even come across us? They said, oh, we've tried Domo, or we've tried Power BI, or we've tried those, but they're not very useful in the field. And so it's actually the second bucket you mentioned of folks who are not traditionally very well served by BI tools, but still need data to figure out, do they pick the berries today, or do they send this shipment on a truck, even though it's not yet full? Or do they wait for additional stuff to arrive? We have a convenience store chain that uses us. So these are kind of data in the field type use cases, which I kind of want to say we stumbled into, because initially we built it thinking it would be the heads of data, the data analysts, the PMs, maybe some engineers. But we figured out there's this huge segment, actually 80% of the global workforce doesn't sit in front of a desk on a daily basis. They're in the field. And they are not folks who are debugging something in a Python notebook. They're not someone who has a $80 a month, $70 a month Tableau subscription. And so there's this huge opportunity, and that's really where we're leaning into and kind of focusing on.
And one of the things we've seen as part of like going through this journey as well is sort of how the consumerization of apps, when you take an enterprise app and make that consumer driven, it opens up this large segment. So one thing we've realized is in emerging markets, the primary computing interface is very much a mobile device. That's what they have, that's what they run with, and that's typically what they'd also like to see data on. Another thing that we've seen in terms of categories is like the Gen Z use case, where that's the only interface that they have, and that's what they're comfortable doing a lot of things on. So these are two interesting segments that we've seen as we've been working on Zing Data use us, and this is what we've also been focused on, making that experience right for those users.
And one quick note, Ryan, that I think is kind of interesting if you think about another space, let's say TikTok versus YouTube, or Canva versus Photoshop. A big part of our aim is how do you make a thing more useful to more people in more places? And so was video editing a thing before TikTok? Absolutely. Did TikTok make it a step change easier to do it in a lightweight, quick way? Yeah, it did. Did Canva make it way easier to put together kind of a blog post image versus doing it in Photoshop? It absolutely did. And that dramatically expands who can use it and even where they can use it. And I think that hasn't really happened in the data world till now, because companies were building stuff for analyst teams, for data science teams. And if you go and sell to someone something that has 90% but not 100% of the functionality that they're using, if their day in day out job is they're doing analysis, then naturally it's like, wait, hold on, it doesn't have this very, 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 very specific feature, with Sankey charts or whatever, right? And it's like, wait, those aren't there, so it's not complete. Whereas the macro picture is 99% of the world and 99% of people at a company who would make better decisions if they had data at their fingertips don't care about that. And so it's sort of how can you be thoughtful and selective about what you include in a product to make it that step change easier.
You're muted, homie.
Oh, come on, man. That is such a key point there, Zach. Is like,
Yeah.
and we got a comment here. Actually, I think this is very insightful. So it's kind of a natural extension of edge devices used in the field, right? It's like bringing the data experience to the edge in a way.
Yeah.
Yep. And a quick example of that from one of our users is I posted a TikTok video just showing that you could like set up a real-time alert, just like not like no high production values. And they have folks out in the field. They have a lot of retail locations, and now they know when something is getting low on stock, so they can restock it. So they don't need a super expensive inventory management system. They don't need a huge BI team. They don't need to write a ton of Airflow pipelines. They tap on a graph and say, let me know when it goes below X. And that is visible to each of the people in each of the locations so that they know when they need to restock. And so that pushing it to the edge is actually really powerful. Because if you think about it, a truck driver uses data to figure out if they should go or not. Yeah. A store manager figures out if they should be restocking this thing or not. You have a company that grows fruits and vegetables, and they're figuring out, hey, do I pick stuff today or do I refrigerate it? Or you can actually vent ethylene so it lasts longer and doesn't ripen as quickly. These are all data-driven decisions. The person out in the field you might not think of as like a traditional BI user, but there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So and architecturally, for edge to really happen, I think a couple of things need to play well. I mean, traditional edge computing has always been intake. You're ingesting stuff. In the case of BI, for edge BI, we're really understanding the context of where the user is, what their location is, what are the possible questions they're probably going to ask, and what is the discrete results that they're trying to get to. And so that combination of attributes is what helps for a good experience. And those are the things that we've thought a lot about.
And that actually is a really very interesting to me. If you look and you go back, I don't know, how long ago was it? 8 years now? I worked for Oracle for a little while. And at the time, they were trying to come up with pretty much, they had a vision of that experience where you'd be in the field, you'd have your mobile device, and it would use your location. Like the classic example we gave to people was, you go to the warehouse and you look at your mobile device, and what you see is like it's automatically filtering a slicer for the warehouse you're in. And that was kind of at the time, as far as we could conceive to take this sort of experience. So what types of things are you able to do based on things like, their location or the context of where the individual is in serving up that data experience?
Totally. So you can think of your smartphone as having a ton of sensors, right? It has GPS, it's always online for the most part. And so let's take an example of a long-running query. Well, traditionally, if you're at a computer, you kind of wait for the query to complete. Or if you try to use the mobile version of most legacy BI players, let's say, it will just time out. And unless it's an export of your data, which then is lagged. And so what do? Our server persists a connection to your database. The query runs. And by the way, we do some clever stuff like windowing functions in the background. So if it's a really big query, we're not actually running the whole query. We're running it in a way where we'll show the biggest contributors based on what you want. That's a small example of some of the engineering that goes into building a mobile experience that actually is going to work and be fast and performant versus just trying to jam a thing that was on desktop and put it on a phone and then have it time out and have way too many values on it. If you run a query that's taking a while to run, we'll send you a push notification when it's ready. So you don't need to keep the app open. You don't see it time out. You just know when the query completes. You tap it and the result is ready and cached for you. And so a lot of those nuances, if you don't build them in from day one, into the architect. We actually built mobile before we ever built web. We support web too because people want to, write SQL sometimes and do more complex stuff, and that's totally fine. But it's way harder to take a thing that is on desktop and jam it onto a phone and have it work well. And that's actually why we started from the ground up, building a kind of mobile experience. And so the things that are interesting that we're excited about are being notified when something completes, being notified when there's alerts, because we have real-time alerts. And so when your data is real-time and your notification mechanism is real-time, then you actually have real-time data in the field. For instance, hey, this pipeline is having some warnings that are flagging that we should go inspect, physically inspect, have someone in the field go know and do that. Or
a literal pipeline.
Literally, yeah.
Literal. I've heard someone
Pipeline
talk about
IRL.
data so long, I hear pipeline. I don't even think about an actual physical object. Pipeline.
Yeah, but I think about that, right?
Yeah.
Like think about most of the discussions around data are relatively siloed in this world where the real world is this totally different, I don't want to say scary thing, but it's kind of exciting to see those two things bridge. So we have location-based querying, we have real-time alerting, and if you're logged in, there's all the row-level security stuff you'd want, but that kind of just fades into the background when you can ask a natural language question. So in Zing, you can dictate and say, hey, what products are out of stock? And we do the English to SQL conversion. We integrate with OpenAI. We're working on some stuff with Google's Palm 2. And so that's a question that a person in a factory might have. What products do I need to restock to finish the production order that I have over the next month? And you could dictate that from scratch. You don't need to have aliased any of the fields. You don't even need to have done data modeling ahead of time, because the state of generative AI has gotten to a point where it can disambiguate stuff in pretty clever ways, figure out a lot of the joins. And so voice querying, natural language, real-time alerting, location-based querying. And then I think one of the most important pieces is actually that collaborative layer. So if I email you and you can only respond to the email on your computer, it's going to take you a while to get back to me sometimes, right? You're out and about, maybe you're on vacation, don't have your laptop with you, or maybe you're just, commuting to and from work on the subway or whatever it is. Now we say, hey, I mention you, you see it right there. And I could say, hey, does this number look right? Or am I using the right definition? Or does this match up? Have we looked at a similar question to this before? And you'd be like, yes, we have, or no, we haven't looked into it yet. And in 5 seconds, you can give me that feedback that I need to kind of be unblocked. And that, contrasts with this world of you have a question, someone goes and creates a dashboard for you, they publish it, maybe it doesn't look right or doesn't have the filter you need. You then ask them for edits. It kind of goes back to the queue, this kind of long, inefficient, painful, and expensive process where when it's available anywhere, you can kind of make it radically more efficient.
Yeah, I think, one of the interesting things about the approach, and I hadn't really thought about it much until we started talking here, but it's really, one of the things that we think about a lot on the show, and we talk to people about, is like, what is the next BI experience going to be? Yeah. And one of the fundamental challenges, and I think it was you mentioned it earlier, Zach, is like that you come up with something that feels fresh, but by necessity, if you're still using the form factor of the mouse and the computer screen, it's going to be lacking all sorts of things that people are used to and their current workflow depends on in Power BI or Tableau or whatever they're using, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm curious, your experience with this is just purely the form factor change to a different device. Does that open up some doors to say, where people are no longer as worried about, well, can it do X? Can it do Y? Because now they have like a different tactile experience. They're in a different place. And suddenly the fact that you can't do some, you don't have
Yeah.
all the blending features that they have in Power Query.
Yeah.
They're suddenly like, you know what, it doesn't matter because I'm on the subway.
Yeah, I imagine people aren't asking, can this be exported to Excel quite as often. I'm
Actually,
sure people do still
we have
ask.
export to CSV. You tap 3 dots and you get
There you
export
go,
to CSV.
because that's
And
go.
the reason we did that is because we actually figured out that was someone says, hey, this graph looks great. Can you give me the underlying data?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes people ask you that question, you are on the go and you still need to give that to them. And so we've thought about kind of what that set of things is. So row level security actually matters a lot. Why? Because I can build an app and say, you're going to see the prospects that you need to go after. You're going to see your own sales over the last month or whatever. And I build that once and then make it available to everybody in my organization as like a viewer or something. And they'll all see on their phone exactly what they need to see relevant to them. So that's an example of like a feature that does matter that we did need to include and recently built out. But you're exactly right. You don't expect, if I go back to kind of the Canva or TikTok example, you don't expect to edit a feature film in TikTok or iMovie. You're still probably going to do that in something like Final Cut Pro. But you're actually going to get a lot more videos made and a lot more people creating and a lot more people learning how to create by offering these tools that are a step change easier. And so we don't think about, our aim is not an explicit non-goal is for you to build machine learning models from scratch on your phone.
Yeah.
That's an explicit non-goal. But an explicit goal is to take the 40% of the time that a data science team is spending on ad hoc questions and dramatically reduce that. And a lot of times, and you've probably been there before, it's like, hey, this chart goes back 2 years. Can you make it go back 3 years? Or
Yes.
hey, can you split? Right now you're splitting it by region, but I actually need it split by sub-region. And that's not a filter that you put on the dashboard. So can you go recreate this thing for me? And that's a really inefficient, cumbersome process and actually a costly process. And so if you can make it a step change easier, where you say, modify question, add, break down or group by, run, that's 10 seconds. And so we focus on that kind of easier 80% versus trying to do the really harder, 10 or 20%.
And one thing that we've seen generally from a mobile use case is that the chain analysis is a little different. You are starting out with like an initial ask of data, and it's usually like a smaller subset of data. And then from there, you can kind of take that further to like ask more questions. And we see that very different from if you were operating on a dashboard on a desktop. And so that's what we've like designed internally to accommodate for. I think the great parallel here is with Robinhood and stock trading. You could always do that from your desktop, but once you've made that simple, the engagement is so much higher and people become more comfortable with that data. And so those are the two goals that we're striving for here.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And an interesting kind of related point to that is when you go from one surface that you can, ask questions on, right? So Tableau, Power BI, a bunch of the others, they have mobile apps, but those are view only. And so by making it so you can ask questions from wherever you are and respond to things from wherever you are, you actually change this social dynamic. And I saw this at Facebook. So we used to build experiments and ship them only on web, because that was the easiest, fastest thing to do. If you're building for mobile, you need an Android engineer and an iOS engineer, and you had to test all this stuff together. So natural thing you do is just like ship it on web. That was the easiest thing to experiment on. But what you would very frequently find, almost every experiment, in a social system, in a collaborative system like BI is, where you have a question, but maybe someone else needs to weigh in or knows some part of the data better than you do, is if you're only on one surface, and this is true for commenting on Facebook or true in a BI tool too, if you're only on one surface, then actually the time for you to respond to something, the richness of that conversation, the number of back and forths, how informative it is actually a lot more limited than if everybody, right, the salesperson who's on the go to go meet with a customer, but says, oh, here's what happened. We didn't hit the revenue number in this region because we lost this major account. And they know that, and they can give that context in the flow of them going and meeting with customers and kind of doing their work and living their life. And so you can actually have much better conversations. It's a weird thing that's not always immediately obvious. But think about kind of Slack. If you only could look at Slack or only look at Teams on a computer, that would be a far less informative, and it would take conversation would take a lot longer to get to kind of an informed answer where everybody was weighing in. And we think the same is true kind of in the analytics space. It's just folks haven't necessarily been thinking about it as a social system with kind of that, Sabin was talking about, that kind of consumery mindset of how do you make a thing super easy, available everywhere, that people expect from Facebook or LinkedIn or Slack or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think the challenge, the challenge for BI in general, in my mind, over the next decade, there's two things. The one is dealing with the kind of scale and data governance problems that have been, I think, actually have gotten worse over the last 5 or 10 years compared to what we were doing in the previous generation of BI. But the second one is reaching new audiences with new BI experiences, moving beyond just a dashboard. And collaboration in BI cannot be, oh, I look at my dashboard and I click a button and a chat window slides out on the side, right? Like everyone tried to add something like that to their BI tool, maybe between 2014 and 2018, and nobody used any of it. And I think a big part of it was like you had to be in a certain place, in a certain frame of mind. You had to be in the tool. You had, in order to even think to do that. And the Slack analogy is really good. I mean, the way Slack has changed communication at work is quite astounding when you think about it. And I was at it many years ago. I was at a company where where I was the person who was like, hey guys, like all my nerd friends use this thing called Slack. And like we should give it a go. And like it was an all remote company. We had no office, right? And it just revolutionized the company culture.
Yeah, I remember joining, because I joined the same company straight out of college, and it was almost a culture shock. It's like I was just using like a Google Docs, like my entire team was editing stuff at the same time, and I'm like, you guys are emailing Excel files
to one another
back and forth. Like, what is this?
Yeah, it was brutal. We've got a bunch of comments coming in.
Oh yeah.
Let me run through a few of them with you. So Miko, friend of the show, Miko. Export to Excel is absolutely still the #1 request.
It always will be. Always will be.
And that was a thing where we figured out kind of what is the set of stuff that we need to have, that we shouldn't break, because it's so critical to a workflow. And examples there are, I should be able to export my graphs. I should be able to export as a CSV. I should be able to create a dashboard. Actually, we built a thing where you ask a question, you just drag it up, drop it into a dashboard from your phone, and it will work fine on web and all that stuff too. And so that sharing, permissioning, who's a viewer, who has access to what, that needs to be there. Building, calculating an area under the curve for an ML model. There's other tools that are great for doing that. Yeah. And that's not kind of where we think we can deliver a awesome experience on a mobile device given the constraint.
It's good to hear you say that. That's such an important thing for, I think, a young data company to know, because there's a temptation that I've seen to try to do everything, right? And the tools that attempt to do everything in our industry that we might say, oh, they do almost everything. Yeah, but do they all do it all well?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
I mean, only one company can get away with trying to do everything, and they do it by doing it mediocre and 5 years later. It's called Microsoft.
Right. So this is Richard Ashton says, it's like what we're talking about here would massively speed up and improve collaboration and engagement, and I agree. So here's Tom Wilczek. Another underrated benefit of mobile that Tom saw in the past was increased adoption, right? So it's just more likely that a sales rep will pull out a phone and look at a report with a few taps and a swipe than they're ever going to log into the BI front end and do something there.
Yeah, and an interesting kind of sales person use case is, you're going into a renewal conversation. You want to see, has this client used a given feature, or how many users have they added to their account? Because you're, renegotiating for the next year, and those types of questions. Maybe you had the BI team put together a dashboard with the drop down of customers and all that sort of stuff, but it didn't include the new feature that shipped. And so if someone's even slightly savvy, you could say, hey, show me count of users at company X by feature. And you go into that conversation, and you can actually run it, get a graph, make it look how you want to, drop it into a presentation, do that all on your phone. It's this like step change easier versus fun backstory. I saw what happens when salespeople want to use data, but don't have the tools. And what ended up happening is the one guy on our team who was kind of the dedicated data science and data analyst, he would just have a huge number of requests thrown at him of, hey, can you do this graph? Can you do this analysis? So once you build a data culture where people want to use data, but to do so, they need to go take a, Tableau class, and you're in this world where it's close to $1,000 a year for a license, or LookML, you want to add another data source, you need to go do the LookML modeling before you can pull in a data source. Frankly, I think that is just a huge barrier to making this stuff accessible. So why is Excel so broadly used? And this whole realm of like shadow IT or shadow data products, it's because it doesn't require you to go get an approval or create modeling work up front. It makes it so you can just go do a thing on your own. And so that element of usability and ease of use is one of the reasons it's so popular, even though people have this broader discussion around data governance
and I think the personification of data is really important, because for the devices you work with, the first thing when you get a mobile phone, the first thing you typically do is put a theme on it, change your wallpaper. You're personifying that to make it look the way you want. And so for data, we think that's an easier way to do this, which is I want to ask the questions I want for the flow that I want to be able to do it in. It's not the generic dashboard. It's not the generic report that's been constructed for my whole team. I want to be able to use this so I can perform my job function better. And that's what we really think about. What's the personification level here that we can take this to the next level for?
So an example of that is Sabin cares about different metrics. He cares about when we have, a spike in 404s from our website. He cares if a user hits something and then saw an error because maybe we need to go fix that. I care a lot about new user signups. I care a lot about, if people are inviting their colleagues. I care a lot about people who are, on a free plan, who want to upgrade to a paid plan, all those types of things. And so you might even have the same question that we share, but I have different alerts set up at different levels. I care about, changes. He cares only if there's, exceeding some absolute level. And so those are quick examples of like how you kind of can have the same data, even the same set of questions, but kind of want to do different things with them.
Yeah, Miko shares here account. So Miko and I worked together at Count for a while, and
Cool.
at Count we called the order takers the chart monkeys, right?
I love it.
And you don't want to be a chart monkey. It's not a good feeling.
It's a lot of time. We've done some surveys. We've heard it's like roughly 40% of most BI or data analyst teams' time is what they call they call them like questions that are sub 20 lines of SQL, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's not a conceptually complex thing. It's sort of just like, hey, where should I get started from? What are the fields I need? How long do I need them for? What are the splits I need? Now, there's always going to be hard stuff that requires, 5 joins across tables, and then for some reason a union null and something's in JSON and needs to be parsed, and you have to pull in like some regex to do that parsing in some complex way. Like that will exist, and that's not initially our kind of focus. We put that in the hard 10 or 20%. But a lot of the kind of code monkey or the chart monkey type questions are ones where you could create one question, save it, and then someone can just build on that. And they'll see it, if I type something like sales of new products, right? And I want to go build on that and say sales of new products for my customer list, right? That should be a really quick operation and take away that kind of 40% of like lower value or really easy stuff that is easy enough to make available more broadly. And I think you were talking about, Ryan, a little bit, the Cognos world. If we look like 10 plus years back, actually right around the time the first iPhone was coming out, there's a company called Roambi, ROAMBI. And I actually know one of the early, yes.
Yes, we know Rumby, yes.
Yes, I actually know one of the early employees there, and he and I have spoken. And as I was looking at, as we were thinking about who's thought about this problem, and they had, I think there's a couple things that are way different today, though, right?
Yeah.
So their model was, hey, you have a Cognos report, and we'll hook into that or business objects or whatever it is. Yep. Okay.
There you go.
And so that model kind of still was relatively reliant on this data team setting stuff up, the data being in your underlying data store and Teradata or whatever it is. What we've said is, well, what does it mean for you to be able to ask a question from scratch on any data source wherever you are? So if you want, you can actually hook us up to a Google Sheet from your phone, like auth into Google or the link, or upload a CSV or an Excel from your phone, or of course Snowflake or BigQuery or your kind of more canonical data warehouses, and just query that stuff straight away. There's not this modeling layer. You actually can even use natural language on it straight away. And so the shift, I think, has been, this kind of lighter weight mobile layer that depended on kind of Cognos or whatever it is underlying that, to, hey, actually, if you still are reliant on Cognos or business objects or it being in Tableau or whatever, you still have this problem of a person has a question, it needs to go to a data team, they need to create a thing that then needs to get published, then you have this mobile layer built on top of it, and that ends up being a pretty long, somewhat expensive life cycle. So props to Roambi. We think they were, they literally were building this right as the iPhone came out.
Yeah.
Bleeding edge at the time. Yeah. But I think now there's certain things we could do, right? Like, so OpenAI and generative AI, you can disambiguate fields. You don't need to specify all those aliases. Like, AI has gotten smart enough where most of the time it can figure that stuff out, which means you can reduce the burden on an end user. We've built mobile interfaces that make it a step change easier. So you can reduce the burden of needing to pre-create that on a desktop, as an example.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, a good opportunity to kind of talk about your experience actually implementing generative AI in a data tool and in the real world where you have real people using it to do real data stuff. I think there's so much speculation right now, and so much of it is we always say on this show that like there's like a wall beyond which I don't believe anyone can see about where this is going to go in the long term.
No.
And in the short term, most people are just speculating, right? But you've actually done some stuff here.
Yeah, we have people running, every day. We have lots of natural language queries coming through Zing. And I'll tell you, over the last couple of weeks, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I know who's CTO at a couple 100-person company. And he said, hey, with, OpenAI and LLMs, does this mean I don't need to have as many analysts on my team? And so, right, he's a super smart guy, like a very serious data person, and people are thinking about kind of how it impacts them. So I think the excitement and the opportunity is real, right? This is a thing where you can go and, at least for simple questions, type something in and get SQL on the other side and run that. That's really cool. Now, there's a bunch of limitations, and we've talked about that in a sec, but the first pass, like if I've heard about generative AI and I'm in the data space, should I be like trying to learn a little bit more about it or experimenting with tools, whether it's Zing or a lot of other tools have kind of incorporated generative AI over the last couple months. Those are absolutely things you should be playing with and figuring out where they can make your life easier, reduce some of the work on you or your team.
Yeah.
The piece that I think is probably less broadly discussed is where it doesn't work swimmingly. And so there's a handful of companies that have said, oh, we're going to make it a purely conversational interface for your data. And the challenge with that is you don't know what you can ask. Disambiguation ends up being pretty hard. And actually, if I just show you what fields you have, you're like, oh, that's the stuff I can ask about. It's actually way clearer than like, what fields do I have? What fields are in this table, right? This kind of long back and forth. Think about it as if you were going to go to a restaurant and you wanted to order lunch, but there was no menu. So you're like, hey, I'd like some food. They're like, okay, we have some food. You're like, okay, like what specifically do you have? Well, we have, do you want entrees or do you want salads? I guess entrees. And then they're like, okay, here are the entrees I have, right? This sort of cumbersome discovery process. Whereas if you go and you see a menu and you're like, I want the burger and fries, number 4, right? That's actually way more straightforward for a lot of use cases. And so we don't think that generative AI is the sole answer. We think it's a part of the answer. And so we still have deterministic ways you can kind of get to a query result. And we still see people using those deterministic, like tapping through stuff ways as probably about 70% of the queries that happen. So probably about 70 is deterministic. Maybe 20% is people playing around with generative AI and natural language querying. And then about 10% is SQL and there's
it's a great powerful assist as well for the folks that would be confused by a schema or a table or a query in that sense. And so this is that barrier that gets lowered because you can ask a natural question and you can get a result and you can kind of take that further. So we put guardrails around our generative AI experience so that people can get to results fast and the correct responses. That's another thing that isn't also as discussed, which is what kind of creative liberties does generative AI take with respect to my schema, with respect to my results, and how curated are these, and should I worry about the answer that I'm getting? And so those are all real problems that can be meaningful, can have meaningful impact if you do provide the wrong answer. So those are things that we've thought about, and I think it's still being assessed on a daily basis with the AI models that are coming out.
Yeah. So Miko's on fire in the chat here. So Miko shares her dream, which is oh, that's the wrong one. Here we go. Miko's dream. To have an AI bot that tells her what she needs to know, right? So she can just say like, this is what I'm worried about. Let me know when there's a problem, basically. It keeps me abreast of any changes, like how Google Maps tells you when it's time to leave. So is that the type of data experience you think we may be able to deliver here?
I think so. I mean, the ultimate aim for any view of any data is to drive to an action. You want to do something with that. Like it is, the means to something. And so if we can make that experience easier so that you can get to your action faster, better, more correct, I think that's the end state. That's the ultimate goal.
And as a quick example, and this is something even from the early days that Sibin and I have been talking about, how do you take stuff, my background's statistics, his background's engineering, and I don't think that the average person who uses data, whether they're the truck driver, they're the store manager, or maybe even a VP product or head of data, I don't think you should need to exactly remember, your chi-squared or the standard deviations for the 99.9. I think your software over time can be smart to that and color code stuff and let you know in simple terms and say, oh, hey, this is a question that you seem to check a lot and it seems like something important dropped. And a lot of the stuff today, this kind of anomaly detection is pretty basic, kind of over report stuff. And I don't think is quite at that like super high utility level. I think that will improve over time. And one of the ways that we sort of constructed kind of Zing and how we're building it is uh, starting kind of the way you would start building a social network. So if you open up Zing, you'll see a list of questions that you and your colleagues have asked. Not just you, but you and your colleagues, if they've shared it with you. And what that means is you see like comments from other people, you see their profile photo, and over time, in the same way a news feed tries to show you stuff that it thinks is relevant for you based on your interests and your network, or Gmail tries to say, hey, this thing is important. What does that look like for your own data? And in a certain sense, over time, we'll get better at showing you, hey, this is a question that you've commented on a lot, that it seems like you have a lot of interest in, and something major happened, right? There was a major change. We'll let you know about that. And so I'm excited about this confluence of not just AI and generative AI, but the social element that adds so much to it. And I think a lot of people miss out. Like if I'm just talking to a chatbot, that's like helps me try to do a thing. But there's all this context that my colleagues have. I don't need to ask OpenAI the SQL for a question that my colleague who's on the data science team has already answered and is vetted and double checked and knows all the numbers high. So what do we do? When I search for something in Zing, we show you a list of questions that have already been created from your colleagues where they've saved them and they think they're good and high quality. And then we say, or you can go run it from scratch. And so I don't think the answer in any kind of workplace setting, any kind of collaborative setting is solely like just go talk to the chatbot, because there's all this institutional knowledge that is over time will get more codified in code, but there's all this sort of discussion of why did this happen, or conjecture as to what maybe drove a change. And that's not merely a statistical calculation. It's also a, fact-finding mission. And we're excited about the confluence of those two things. So that's going to be a super interesting area. And I think your viewer is on the right track of that being something where instead of you setting up 15 alerts in a deterministic way, it can say, hey, it looks like you care about major drops in revenue. Do you want me to let you know when there's a 30% week on week drop? You say sure, and now you'll be notified when there's an anomaly there.
Gotcha. So one thing I'm curious about, so it seems like the natural language querying, you said it was what, like 20 to 30-ish percentage of what people doing, the rest is deterministic.
Yep.
So that like natural language querying, as it is right now, is it using any of like the large language models, or like how are you using the large language models? Are you using like the OpenAI API and sending tokenizers and embeddings and like, so like what does it actually look like technologically?
Yeah, so we are using LLMs. There is a combination of multiple LLMs that we're using, and with different creativity parameters to get that response. And then based on the error rates for each of those, we'll provide you what's the best output from here. So we're running a few models in parallel. We will work with the data source and the schema that you have to see which one can be fine-tuned. And based on that response, we'll say this is the best result out of all of this. And so it does take some good understanding of the original schema, the data sources that you have configured, and the type of question you're answering to be able to get those results. I think over time we can take this a lot further by working with multiple models. There's different latencies that we're seeing between different LLMs. I know OpenAI, from when they moved from Codex to GPT-3 to GPT-4, we're seeing some variations as well in terms of how it's processing those. And so those are all considerations for us in terms of how we do that internally.
Interesting.
And candidly, sometimes the models will give you something. You give a question, natural language, you give the schema and kind of metadata about the fields. And sometimes the models will give you SQL that will not run, that makes up tables that don't exist. And
Naturally.
so there's not only the, hey, let's hook into a model, but there's actually a good amount of engineering to say, wait, we're going to run 3 models in parallel and see that 2 of them came back with the same answer. So it's more likely to be right. It runs on the database with this one, but not that one in this circumstance. So let's have a waterfall logic for what we try, what's returned. And then I think the other element that we're thinking a lot about, and frankly anybody in the space should be, is what do you do when it doesn't give you what you want?
Yeah.
Right. So do you just show someone an error? Do you show them malformed SQL that was generated and say, hey, go figure it out? Well, that's not a very easy to use user experience. And an end user who's not technical, who's like, I just want to ask questions, but doesn't necessarily have deep familiarity with SQL, isn't going to know what to do with that. So I think there's this interesting kind of challenging middle space of like, and this is true generally with LLMs in the state of them today. If a thing sounds good or sort of looks right and runs, but is wrong, is that actually the BI you want to base your business off of? Right?
Right.
The ideal for hot take, you want your BI that you're really using to like run your business and make important decisions to be accurate. And the black box flavor of LLMs doesn't always 100% align to that. And so for important questions about your business, you still probably at the very least want to double check those outputs. Or that's why we still see a lot of people doing those things deterministically. And then for kind of quick questions, one-offs, they'll maybe use the natural language stuff. But for their core metrics, we have a user and they have, margin by store and what's selling fastest. They are creating those questions deterministically and they rely on those. And that's what they look at every day and set up alerts on. So they set that up deterministically. And then they have all these ad hoc kind of interesting things they kind of want to look at where it's informative and they're technical enough they can kind of see if it looks right. But I think LLMs today and English to SQL that runs and you kind of hope it's right or need to debug the SQL on your own still isn't really the dominant way that most companies building their canonical dashboards everybody's going to rely on should be creating them, unless someone can read that SQL, know exactly what's happening, make sure that it syncs with what it's supposed to and ties with what it's supposed to. Otherwise, you can get in this world where you have a lot of noise out there very easily and not even know that that's the case.
I did see when I was at the Gartner conference in Orlando a couple months ago, I sat down with some people from ThoughtSpot and they kind of showed me how they did it. And they basically, I thought, because when I first, I spend too much time thinking about the BI market. I'm just one of those kind of nerds. And so, so one of the first things I did when I started playing around with OpenAI, one of my first thoughts was, well, what the hell is ThoughtSpot going to do, right? Because this has been their whole thing. And what they did that I think was it makes a lot of sense for them was they basically put the large language model on top of their existing keyword-based kind of like query generator so that you can talk to it, but fundamentally what it does is it converts it into the same sort of query that ThoughtSpot would have made beforehand, right? They just kind of layered
a similarity search on like your existing queries,
exactly, and the existing like keyword-based query builder that they already had, and so I thought that was smart because to your point, like you really can't have this you can't run your business on this probabilistic query generator that is usually right, but not
right, but sometimes can be very wrong.
Right.
And I think ThoughtSpot, their approach was very much how do we kind of build on the thing that we already have.
Right.
I do think, and just to be super, super direct, they still rely you to do all this aliasing and setup. And so it's still this kind of high upfront effort thing. And I think for broader BI adoption, for people to actually bring tables and use it on a regular basis, it still needs to be, you want to pull the best from OpenAI, which is that disambiguation and figuring out all the aliases. Whereas I think my critique, and I have a lot of respect for ThoughtSpot, actually know some of the early folks there, but I think it's still a lot of work to get set up and started on. And I think there is an opportunity for new folks to disrupt that by saying, hey, you actually don't need to go specify 10 aliases for this field. We can figure that out. we can figure that out with LLMs.
We had that. If you go back 3 episodes, I think we had Ina Sella from Illumex on the show, and that was a big part of what we talked about with her, was actually the semantic layer. And if you think back to the Cognos business object days, we really built metadata models. They were basically semantic layers, but like you were saying, we did that. It was intensely manual. It took forever to do. Updating it was such a pain that when someone would request a new column in a report, it would be like, okay, wait 6 months because I've got so many requests for new columns and I got to manually update this metadata model. And the point she was making was like, well, look, it's not going to be like that going forward because the semantic layer is going to be generated by an LLM and you're going to supervise it and make sure that it's accurate. And then it's all these it's like all these LLMs working together, right? The semantic layer is generated by one, and then there's one you're talking to, and it's sending a query to the semantic layer, which was also generated by an LLM. And
It's like AI husbandry.
yeah, really, it's what it's like.
It's like, I don't know what it's doing, but I just told them to work together. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you create an LLM to create LLMs, but you want to make sure they're all friends, so you the social score.
That's exactly what it
There's
feels like.
there's incredible efficacy differences that we've seen even among models. Like, for example, an older model like the Codex model from OpenAI, from a query completion standpoint, is pretty strong. Even in some cases better than GPT-4. But then from a dialect parsing standpoint, not as good as GPT-4. So some strange differences that we've seen, but overall, like a good evolution.
Yeah. I think we'll take one last question and then wrap it up here. So Martin Otto wants to know, do we think analysts really want to talk to their BI systems and aren't we concerned that there's too many possible interpretation errors where things can go off the rails?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two different comments I would have on this. For certain things, it's actually great and not ambiguous. So if I say, show me which products are out of stock, and I have a products database with number of units in stock, that's actually a really straightforward question. And that's actually a question in the field I could dictate to my phone and get a quick answer and know what I need to do. I can immediately say, okay, I need to go restock, reorder those things. Super clear action item, straight, well-structured question, not a lot of ambiguity. So in that case, it's actually great. There's this other set of things, which is which of my customers is high propensity to churn? Well,
yeah.
Let me define high propensity. Do I have enough data on a given user? Maybe they're a new user, but they're on a monthly plan. And I don't yet have enough data to know if they're high propensity of churning, right? The model maybe relies on 3 months of data or 6 months of data, and I don't have that for them yet. So do I ignore them? Do I exclude them? Like that's a thornier question.
Yeah.
And how do I want to build my propensity model? How accurate does it need to be? That's like a question that I don't think just asking an LLM and getting an answer on the other side is going to be very satisfying or actually really build much trust. You need to trust your results. And so in that question, there's so much ambiguity. It's really probably not a great fit. But in this straightforward, simple cases, like which product sold, the most number of units over the last week for this store, those are questions that people out in the field, people doing their work on a daily basis have that can be answered well, even today with the state of the union on LLMs. So I think there's going to be kind of a bifurcation. The easier stuff, the stuff that you might do in an Excel or other BI tools today, some of that you can ask simple questions for. And then the stuff that you're in Python or joining more than a couple tables, we handle joins automatically. But if you're joining more than, let's say, 3, 4, 5 tables, you're probably wanting to think about what those are. Are those left joins? Are those not? What are you doing when there's not a match? Those types of complexities where you're probably going to want to take the time. So there's going to be a role for smart people who know how to use data, even with the growth in these LLMs. And I think they'll find kind of the areas that they work well, and analysts will focus on the areas that are more complex that the models don't necessarily handle brilliantly.
Yeah, I think one last comment here. This is from Brent. So, when help desk people field questions, they create a cache of knowledge articles. Could the same sort of thing be built into BI tools to guide the LLMs?
Yeah.
100%. And that's
so.
really
I think that's the
about
semantic layer
reinforcement.
that we think can be influenced by the innate business knowledge that folks have. That's a great input to an LLM model because that guarantees a stronger result.
Awesome. Okay. Fascinating conversation today, guys. Thank you so much for coming
very,
on.
very interesting. Very cool.
Thanks for having
Loved
us.
it. Thanks
Yeah.
so much for having us, Ryan and Eric. This is great.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and all right. So
All right.
we're right at the top of the hour. Any final words, Eric?
No, I think we've covered it.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for tuning in, and thanks again for Sabin and Zach from Zing Data for a fascinating conversation about mobile BI and LLMs. Actually, let me bring them back on. I forgot to ask, where can people find you guys?
We're on LinkedIn, so you can connect with us on LinkedIn. And then you can actually try Zing for free. We have a free trial at Zing, Z-I-N-G, data, D-A-T-A.com. There's
Cool.
There.
Zing Data. There you go.
There we go.
And
All right.
There. Cool.
Martin asks, "Where's the T-shirt challenge?" No T-shirt giveaway today. I'm behind on
nope.
shipping them out. I can't promise any more T-shirts until I've actually sent some. So, all right, cool. Well, thanks for coming on, guys, and have a good day, everybody. And we will see you next week on another episode of Super Data Brothers.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.